Edith and Randy Woodley have been influencing and mentoring Indigenous leaders and others for over 3 decades. Their service to the most disenfranchised people in America led them to become serious about important issues such as peace, racism, and eco-justice. They are the co-creators of Elohe Indigenous Center for Earth Justice, Elohe Farm, and Elohe Seeds. And I will let Randy explain the meaning of the significance of the Cherokee word Elohe. We are grateful that the Woodleys accepted an invitation from Eugene Friends Meeting to post a link to the Elohe ministry on the Giving Gateway website, on the Eugene Friends Meeting website. I serve as coordinator for the Giving Gateway ministry, and the invitation to speak at our winter retreat is part of a growing relationship between our two communities. If you want to learn more about the Giving Gateway, I will be giving a progress report at this month's meeting for Worship for Business if there's room on the agenda. Reverend Dr. Randy Woodley is the author of many books, including Becoming Rooted, 100 Days of Reconnecting with Sacred Earth, and we have invited him to speak from his ministry as expressed in that book. I'm honored to introduce Randy Woodley, this year's Winter Retreat keynote speaker. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Joe. Hello, friends. Nice to see you. I appreciate the invitation to be able to share a little bit from my own perspective and somebody who sort of covers two worldviews and tries to be a bridge in between. And so that's sort of my chore today, is to try and ask you to start crossing that bridge and begin to understand the way that our Indigenous people think about the earth and who we are here. So I want to make sure somebody shake their heads. You can all hear me okay? Okay, great. I'm glad also that you allow me to do this from my home. As it turned out, I've had pneumonia and that virus for the last couple of weeks. I'm just about over it, but not quite. And I wouldn't have been able to travel today anyway. So I'm thankful to be able to be here in this way. So thank you. So I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen and share a PowerPoint with you. And then at that point, some new information perhaps for a lot of you. That will basically allow us to go and start having conversation. We should have plenty of time for conversation. So this is my propaganda page. So this is just in case you want to, if there's any more things that you want to read by me or see our connect with us in any of our other ways. These are some of the ways that you can connect with us. But so some of you have the book Becoming Rooted, and which is right there. And you're reading the book, so I didn't need to spend a whole lot of time, talking out of the book. But what I'd like to do is sort of give you the background to my thinking and how I wrote the book and sort of the perspective that it comes from. Forgive me, I'll cough every now and then. I'm just about over this thing, but not quite. So a lot of people ask me about the introduction, which is we're all Indigenous from somewhere, right? So my invitation in the book is to start connecting to our own indigeneity. And what does that mean? And so that's the perspective I'd like to bring today. And hopefully we can get there together and have a good time of dialogue afterwards. So let's take a look at a couple things. How do humans relate to creation? Well, I want to tell you a story, one of our Cherokee stories. And then I want to compare that a little bit with the Genesis story. So this is the way the story goes. a long time ago, our people began to kill animals indiscriminately and only take the best parts, and weren't really thankful for when they did it. And so the animals decided they would get together. And the animals decided that they would punish the humans for what they were doing, for their ingratitude and their wastefulness. And so they all got together, and the bears kind of took lead. And first they were like, well, how are they killing us? And the people said, well, the animal people said, well, by bows and arrows. And so they said, well, then let's do that. Let's kill them with bow and arrows. So they built their bows and their arrows, and the bears began to target practice, but they have these long claws, and so they couldn't hit anything, and arrows were going everywhere. And so they said, well, then we're going to have to trim off our claws. Well, then they started thinking about that, and they thought, oh, that's how we make our living, digging in stumps and roots. And so let's do something else. And finally, the rest of the animals got tired of the bears trying to tell everybody what to do. So they said, let's find someone else to be the leader. So they elected the inchworm. And the inchworm heard from every animal there and every insect there, and finally came up with an idea. And the inchworm said, what if we put diseases on the people? We'll make them suffer that way. And so they began to think of all these diseases, influenza and smallpox, and all these different kinds of diseases, and they began to put them on the people. Well, the people began to die. First, it was the young children and the old people, and then the men, and finally the strong women began to die. And pretty soon they were like, well, we've got to do something about this. We're not going to be here anymore. So they approached the animals and they said, we want to say we're sorry and make amends, and we promise to not be wasteful and be grateful from now on. But the animals, they didn't have any pity on the people. And so they said, nope, we don't forgive you. We're just going to leave it as it is. Well, so the people continued to die. And all this time, the plant people were watching this. And the plant people came together in council, and they said, we feel sorry for the people. And so let's do something to help these human beings. So what they did was they decided that they would start coming in their dreams and giving them cures for the diseases that they had. And each plant would come and tell the people in the dreams how you use that plant so they could be healed. Pretty soon the people began to be healed. And then they decided to all come together. So the plant people and the human people and the animal people all came together in a great council. And they set down some rules. And what they said was that from now on, when human beings take an animal or a plant, they'll put some tobacco down on the earth, and they'll say a prayer, and they'll be grateful. And that they'll use every part of that plant or animal, that nothing would be wasted. And if they didn't, the animals had a little deer ghost that would come and put a disease back on the people. So they had the sort of accountability there. And so all of this is how they began to get along, and that way the earth was in balance again. So some of the things, right, that we learned from that, learning from our mistakes, allowing creation to teach us, keeping the balance of the whole community of creation, and to maintain gratitude and also ceremony. So we know the story in Genesis. We know the whole beginning, Genesis 1, with the earth is in balance and harmony, and there's a light at night and a light at day, and there's rain, and there's all these various things. And as we get into that story, and it gets into several stories there, but as we get into that story, we see that Creator speaks to humanity and sets down this sort of law. And there are 4 words that are used in sort of this whole litany in this context. And the first one is the one that you've all heard, have dominion. which if you take dominion the way that it's been translated, it's totally out of context with the rest of what's there, because everything else is about taking responsibility for. And so, and why is that? Why are human beings created last in the story? Because they are the only ones who are able to maintain that balance, who have been equipped to keep everything in balance. And so it becomes sort of the basic job of human beings then to care for the earth. And so this word dominion, which is sometimes used as domination by force, but also used as to take responsibility for, as in being an agent responsible to assure the well-being of those in their care. So my concern is that the West church, by and large Christianity, has failed this mandate. It has misunderstood it, first of all. But secondly, it's failed to keep it, to till and to keep the soil, to serve the community of creation. And that's a radical misunderstanding of humanity's place in the created order. One is to be over it and to take over it. The other is to be a part of it and to care for it, or to co-sustain, which is even a better word, I think, than this word that's used, to co-sustain the whole community of creation. So what does that mean? It certainly means to take care of the earth, but it also means that when everything else is out of balance, that each thing might be taken care of to bring it back into balance, into order, to harmony. And this word Elohe that Jill mentioned is our Cherokee word, which basically, my doctoral dissertation was on Native American tribes who hold this understanding as sort of the key to their living, ways of living. And this harmony way, we can call it in general, or the big picture shalom. Everything is the way it's supposed to be. It's in harmony. It's working the way it's supposed to be. Nobody's at war. Nobody's hungry. The earth's producing what it should. The earth's being taken care of. All of those kinds of things. And there's this sort of universal understanding of this construct. Elohe is our Cherokee. Shalom is the ancient Hebrew word. But every of the 45 tribes that I queried, all of them had a construct by different names. And then I come to find out that people from all over the world do as well. The South African Zulu have Mbutu. The people of the Scandinavia, the Sami people have a construct. People in the Philippines, Hawaiians have aloha, which is much bigger than a greeting, right? And so all of these things sort of tell us that these are the original instructions for humanity, is to take responsibility for, to be an agent responsible to assure the well-being of the whole community of creation. So in other words, we're born to be indigenous. And let me talk about what it means to be indigenous from this perspective. So I use indigenous with both a small I and a capital I. The first definition, originating or occurring naturally in a particular place, native. So that's small I. Any of us can learn to return to our own indigeneity. Second one, inhabiting or existing in a land from the earliest times or from before the arrival of colonization. And that would be what I call capital I, indigenous, for the people who are of the land that you are now on. So we're born to be indigenous. We're born to be caretakers of the earth. We're born to be natural citizens of harmony. And yet we are raised not to be indigenous. So one more thing is organic, which living organisms. So we're not just in charge of objects. We are in charge of living organisms to maintain the whole community of creation. And we do that naturally. Humans carry about 39 trillion microbial cells on them, or basically about 4 to 6 pounds of bacteria, and the average 200-pound person. So we're already sort of caring for those microbes and those cells, whether we realize it or not. But they are also found outside of us. And in 1 cup of healthy soil, it contains all of these things that you see on the screen. 200 billion bacteria, 20 million protozoa, et cetera. And so all of this is part of the community of creation. Healthy soil is sort of where it all begins. So functionally, to be human is to be a co-sustainer of the literal earth. We are a part of it, not separate from it. It's to keep harmony in the world and the whole community of creation, and it's to be indigenous. So there's a people in Northern California, and I visited them during their Pikiavish ceremony, what they call fixing the world, the Kuruk. They do this every year. They have a ceremony every year and dances and songs where they basically pray for the healing of the world, the balance of the world, the harmony of the world. And they come together and they take their role as human beings seriously. And that's what it means to the Kuruk to be a human being. And that's what it means to be indigenous. So how do we lose our indigeneity? I'm going to talk about those, go into them just a little bit. The myth of progressive civilization, utopianism, Platonic dualism, various lies of empire, homogeneity, lack of time spent with creation, and refusal to adapt. These are just some of the ways that our own indigeneity are stolen from us. So I want to read this quote by one of my favorite authors. For the most part, contemporary historians have proceeded from the presumption that modern people are different from and superior to those who came before, especially those designated as primitives. These accounts serve to reinforce the sense of difference and to distance moderns from unflattering legacies of the past. So I always say, who's the most civilized? The person in hand-to-hand combat or the person who drops a bomb from a drone on your living room? I guess it depends on what side of the bomb you're on. But yeah, people in the past maybe knew something that we have actually forgotten. So we learn about all the ancient Greece, China, Egypt, etc. But we don't really learn about ancient American history, and there's a particular reason for that. You're not supposed to learn it. Because if you find out Native Americans were too human, then there's a whole question of land theft and genocide. So we're not really supposed to learn about that history. But I will tell you, and I teach whole classes on what we call pre-Columbian civilization, that all of these things were going on in America, sometimes unparalleled around the world. Sustainable architecture, humanities, sciences, maths, education systems, brain surgery, dentistry, and not everywhere, but in different places around Native America. And all this was happening. Just a quick perspective on a timeline. If you can look, all this is going on. We got the Olmec civilization, which is a pre-Aztec, pre-Mayan civilization. And then way down here in 753, the founding of Rome. And of course, the West is kind of dubbed Greco-Roman civilization as the height of civilization, but it comes in later on. So when you look at the comparison of trying to compare apples to apples, Native America was much healthier, more tolerant of diversity, more in tune with the environment, utilized thousands of medicines and foods. In fact, over 60% of the world's foods originate in the Americas. So, and so I try to look at this, and this wasn't natural, right? So it wasn't like Native Americans come on the scene knowing everything. No, they had to learn it over thousands of years. Here's a place, I don't know if anyone's ever been to Chaco Canyon in New Mexico. Chaco Canyon was this is a recreation of what it was, but it was a very egalitarian society. And between 900 and 1150, Chaco Canyon was a major center of culture, for Pueblo peoples, 75 outlying cities built within 30,000 square miles, composing of agricultural communities, trading posts, ceremonial sites, all connected to a central canyon and another 6 major Chacoan roads that extended another 60 roads. Well-researched and surveyed, generally straight routes, lit up at night with signifiers. Chaco also served, as most Native American civilizations did, as an astrological observatory. Some of you may have been to Cahokia outside of St. Louis, East St. Louis, a city of about 40,000 people. The Aztecs fed about 200,000 people, creating floating gardens. So these are some of the ways that our indigenous people learn to adapt to the environment. But the Western worldview, which really comes to us through the Greeks, and we can get more into that later if we want to discuss that, was having problems about what we call the time of discovery. These were some of the things occurring, especially in England, but in Western Europe: deforestation, depleting of topsoil, oceans and bays being fished out, rivers and streams undrinkable, air pollution, disease, large mammals going extinct, classism. Cities are overcrowded. Majority of people are living in poverty, corruption, greed. Kind of sound familiar, huh? A lot of war, a lot of disease, economic depression. So what I'd like to propose is that after 530 years of the Western worldview in America, has not done the earth nor the world any good, and it's a failed experiment. And so if that worldview is stopping us from caring for the earth and caring for the whole community of creation, then we need to find something different, a different way to think. So I don't probably need to go through all these things. We all know the bad news. Here's one that I'm real concerned about. We've lost 75% of the world's crop varieties. That's one of the reasons that we keep seeds, a lot of heirloom seeds. Herbicides and genetically engineered crops. So all this going on, topsoil is disappearing, forests are shrinking, desertification, coral reefs are dying, and water. And I could talk for a long time about water, but I won't. But indigenous people have lived here for 28,000 plus years. Some say now over 100,000 years, without permanently endangering the land. Just to say about water, that big agriculture uses 70% of all water and wastes the most water. And so if you want to save our water, we have to rethink big agriculture. Think about disasters, and I've been keeping track of these since 1989. Before it was easy to find computers. Now you can just go find charts like this, but you know, by and large, all natural disasters, as we call them, have been increasing in frequency and severity. And here's the average temperature in Washington and Oregon. You can see it's on the rise. So let's talk a minute about energy flow. So energy is kind of what makes the world go around, right? We get it from the sun, it comes to the producers, and then the primary consumers, and then secondary, and then tertiary consumers. So, and then the decomposers. So the number one producer of energy in the world is something we call phytoplankton. It's found in the seas. It actually creates 1/3 of the world's oxygen, phytoplankton. And then the biggest consumer are zooplankton or plankton. They consume the most energy on Earth. Secondary consumers are like fish, and then human beings and all other large mammals are what we call tertiary consumers. So that's kind of like, if you've ever seen goats, they'll just kind of wander from one place and take a bite, wander to another, take a bite. They're not primary consumers, tertiary consumers. But the world's out of balance. In the last, well, we could say the last 200, but let's just say the last 70 years, the Earth's being forced to basically root out its main consumer because it's out of balance. And so what we see happening on Earth is that the Earth is basically spitting out the inhabitants who are bringing the imbalance. Let's talk about unity and diversity for a minute. So this is the wonderful thing about creation and creation design. From the subatomic level all the way down, all the way up to the macro universe, there's nothing that's singular, nothing. There's nothing singular in the whole universe, and we can talk about that later if you want. Everything is this wonderful fingerprint, if you will, or DNA of the creator, which is unity and diversity. And that's sort of how God builds. Doesn't build like we build. Here's how we build. And so what we think of as order, which is trying to make things under control, stable, homeostasis, is what's actually falling apart. That's actual chaos. What humanity in the West calls order is actual chaos, naturally. And nature's chaos, what we see with this reaction of the Earth, basically to climate change and everything else, is actually stability. Because the number one rule in nature is to adapt. And so the Earth is adapting. And it's adapting by basically punishing those who are bringing the disharmony. So adaptation is stability. God builds in open systems like fractals. They contain both unity and diversity in their nature. Homogeneous closed systems are actually built to die, or what we call entropy. Homogeneous race, age, gender, monocultural, hybrid GMO crops, etc., monocultural agriculture, all lead to eventual destruction. The nature of a closed system is to collapse in on itself or to be consumed by more adaptive systems. And the nature of open systems is to adapt. Open systems are indigenous systems. So, order is the reality of planning and perseverance in sustainable systems. Order works with entropy, not against it, building open, adaptable systems of unity and diversity. Chaos is attempting to fight entropy through unsustainable, closed, non-adaptive systems. So a lot of our problems, climate change, the zoonosis of all the different diseases that are spread from animals to people, other diseases are a result of the Western world's rejection of this sort of natural laws. But nature adapts to survive. Under the present circumstances, if we don't change, the final adaptation of nature is human extinction. And we only have a short time to come back to what would be sustainable order. So for millennia, the whole of creation has been producing enough energy to allow humans limited consumption. Humanity, in just a few generations, has accelerated consumption exponentially. Mother Earth is now trying to rebalance the overuse through random acts of nature. She's reclaiming her territory, spitting out the inhabitants in order to restore harmony. So now the top of the food chain is actually the Earth herself. And we talked about Holocene, and now we talk about Anthropocene. But what I want to say is that I would call this what we're experiencing, the Europatricene. And basically, it was a couple quotes here that are nice, but I won't take the time to read them all. But basically, it was a European elite that developed a distinctively mechanistic view of matter, an oppositional relationship to nature, and an economic system indebted to geographical expansion. A particular male European way of thinking about the world. In the Western worldview, the nature of the relationship with the land has changed. And there's a corollary also, you might notice, between how European Americans treat creation and people, especially women, especially the cultural, racial, gendered, immigrant, other, and the poor. What the Western worldview has in common with all of these is to seek to control, to objectify, to expect production from, to exploit, to serve at one's pleasure, variable rape culture. But that's not how we're meant to relate to creation. I love this quote in Job: ask the animals, they'll teach you, or the birds of the air, and they'll tell you, or speak to the earth, and it will teach you, or let the fish of the sea inform you. There's this direct relationship that we are supposed to be having with the rest of creation. We're all in this together. We're all related. Humankind is not woven the web of life. We're but one thread within it. Whatever we do to the web, we do to ourselves. All things are bound together. All things connect. So in a Western alignment worldview, human beings can be categorized apart from nature. The result is a false dichotomy between physical earth and spiritual beings. In a harmony worldview, or an indigenous worldview, human beings are understood as fully physical and the earth is fully spiritual. So healing involves all of it, everything. So all of creation is sacred. There's a problem with worldview when one is considered sacred and not the other. Religious people can, in faith, embody the whole of ourselves to fix the world. This is a chart I won't get into. I'm just going to touch on a couple of these real quick. But basically, I'm comparing a Western worldview to an indigenous worldview, and trying to compare apples to apples. And there's a whole lot of differences. You just take a look at that list for a second. I'll give you a minute. And I'm going to go through a couple of these. So dualism, which I call the foundational fallacy, is to invest in the ethereal or the spiritual, metaphysical, abstract realm to a higher degree than the physical. This comes to us from the Greeks, basically from probably Socrates and his student Plato, and then Plato to Aristotle, and then on, and it became sort of the way that people think, the worldview that was espoused in the West and promoted for so long. It was Aristotle was Alexander the Great's teacher. He's tried to spread this Greek idea of Greco culture throughout Hellenism throughout the world. It started to die down, and then in Europe between the 14th and 17th century, we had something called the Renaissance, which was the revival of Greek or Greco-Roman culture, philosophy, ideas, architecture, art, etc. And so it reinforced this. And out of that, we had two movements. One was called the Reformation. The other one was called the Enlightenment, and both carried this disease of Platonic dualism with them. And what it does is our thoughts and our theologies become disembodied then. In other words, it becomes what we think becomes more important than what we actually do. And so, church creeds and covenants and all of those kinds of things become more important than people. So our theologies become disembodied. This is a sacred secular split, that God is at work in religion more than in the world. The physical, land, good works, our bodies all become suspect in a dualistic worldview. And it creates binary thinking, right or wrong, legal, illegal, heaven, hell, environment or animal, plant or weed, all of these kinds of things that Western thinkers tend to not be able to solve their own problems because they see them in a binary. So another, when you order everything in Platonic dualism, then everything has to be, one thing is greater than the other. Hierarchy comes out of this. Everything's ranked greater to lesser. Equality seems to be wrong or not a preferred system. And it's an easy place then to place women and cultural others and others of other genders and religions, etc., in a lower place in that hierarchy than oneself. And especially humans being above nature is one of the false hierarchies. Utopianism, a shared myth of most religious movements, living for another world in the future or the world that was in the past, negates our humanity, our human frailty, and seeks perfection. The ends almost always justify the means in such a understanding of the world. Individualism, loss of the corporate nature of humanity, understanding the scripture as all about me rather than we, competitiveness over cooperation, majority rule over consensus, etc. White supremacy comes out of this. The fact that light-skinned Western European descended people have the inherent right to control all governance, knowledge, wealth, and power in any given system. And it's a symptom of otherisms. The Greeks had their barbarians, Romans had their savages, English had their heathen, and the West has had Native Americans, African Americans, LGBTQ, immigrants, Muslims, Jews, etc. This also creates an intolerance for difference, a tendency, a propensity toward homogeneity, and laws and other systems are formed to maintain control of that. Modern expressions of white normalcy and white privilege derive from these ancient understandings. So God's also concern is about restoring the common good, structurally, harmony, people becoming more indigenous, being active. So I say Creator's love is abundant, including peace, mercy, justice, hospitality, righteousness, restitution, and a whole plethora of characteristics and expressions for the common good, for which the byproduct is also good for individuals. Harmony Way is not ethereal or utopian in nature, but very real. The Harmony Way can be clearly identified, and it's communal in nature, not being satisfied just to seek the good of the individual, but seeks the common good and benefits the whole community in identifiable and tangible ways. So I ask you a question here. I think religion is best demonstrated through vulnerability. Could it be that God is the most vulnerable being who exists? If God is love, and love means being vulnerable, then God must represent the essence of vulnerability. In Creator's vulnerability, we are invited to become fellow human beings with others who are different from us, to exchange and empower dignity in ourselves and others, to join in reciprocal conversation of each other's understanding of truth, and to live with, for, and among the whole community of creation, which includes people, in harmony. The opposite of vulnerability is superficiality, indifference, and control, including the illegitimate use of power. And the misuse of power is among the primary failures of colonizer religion. So what do we need? Open, adaptable systems, unity and diversity, relationship repair and rebuilding, restitution, massive education among white people by non-Western thinkers. And we can't basically be an apologist for colonialism, because if we do that, we're active proponents of genocide. And so this takes a lot of healing. It's kind of this Henry Nouwen's concept of the wounded healer, right? We continue to heal our own wounds and those of others at the same time. There's a lot to gain. If you look at the list on the right, through this process. So we need to look at our Western worldviews and shed unhelpful paradigms, adapt more indigenous worldviews. Adaptability, no longer rigidness. Intentionality, no longer passive. Inclusive worship experiences, no longer homogeneous. Education by Black, Indigenous people of color, no longer just in a comfort zone. Exploring and embracing diversity narratives, no longer monocultural white myths. Racially diverse leadership, sharing power, no longer tokenism. Self-deprecating humor, no longer taking ourselves too seriously. And empowered, embodied congregations as centers of proactive change, not milquetoast. I like this quote: food for us comes from our relatives, whether they have wings or fins or roots. That's how we consider food. Food has a culture, has a history, has a story. It has relationships. So even down to what we eat and how we eat the food that we eat has something to do with our own indigeneity. So I get a lot of suggestions here. I'm just going to go through real quick. I know you all know a lot of these things. And so saving your own seeds. We always tell people, save your seeds and put us out of business. Composting, shopping at farmers markets, etc. And supporting small farms. All around you, there's small farms who are trying to make it. It's been proven that small farms are more adaptable, need less machinery, less labor, and less environmentally damaging, provide greater economic opportunities than large industrial farms. So the way the industrial farm has to go, we can feed the world better through small farms. And these are just some things that I know probably a lot of you already do. These are basic things that you can just about get anywhere. And then structural change. The fastest way to make structural change is for your communities to create what we call earth rights, rights of the earth legislation, for whether it's protecting waterways or aquifers or wetlands or whatever. There's so many places that have done it around the world and in the United States. And support Indigenous and BIPOC efforts that support those. If you look at these institutions down here, any one of those would be good, but I'm going to suggest that you look at Global Alliance for the Rights of Nature, probably has the most going on right now. So this is from Becoming Rooted. When we look at our future, things look bleak. It's important to be informed about the world and to understand the climate crisis to which we are contributing. Yet the immensity of the crisis can be overwhelming and paralyzing. Sometimes it's time to stop the influx of anxiety-producing data and just quiet ourselves. While it can seem like the little you do in your own home and community won't solve the world's climate problems, don't become defeated. Don't believe that what you do means nothing. If you're doing something, it means something. Light bulbs, laundry lines, compostable sandwich bags are something. Drinking water from a reusable container instead of plastic bottles is something. Recycling, reusing, and minimalizing your lifestyle are something. What we do matters. Most of us also influence others in one way or another. Children, students, friends, neighbors, coworkers, they're all watching how we connect with sacred earth. Perhaps we don't even notice the fact that we are role models. And if, on the rare chance, you lack someone who watches you, maybe you can use a talent you have to shine a light, like writing an editorial, a poem, or a song to be posted online. Even if you feel like you aren't influencing anyone, know this: you are a role model to yourself. It may sound strange, but it's true. We watch ourselves and we know whether our ideals align with our actions. That's called having personal integrity. And integrity is a character trait that has great influence. Integrity in this area at home gives you the right to step forward in the community for bigger projects, campaigns, protests, and actions. But tending to sacred earth starts at home, from private to semi-private to public spheres. Please step forward. So we can have a time of discussion now.
Oh, thank you. Need to plug in the computer. Thank you. So friends, please stand if you have a question or a comment, or online. I think you can unmute yourself and ask a question as well.
We have lots of time and any questions valid, so, or any comment.
Thank you. I want to remind Dr. Woodley, Randy, that we're Quakers, and Quakers sink into silence before asking questions. And so silence doesn't mean we were listening. We were not listening. Silence means we were listening really deeply and we're waiting to see what rises. Sometimes I've seen speakers get uncomfortable with our silences. I think you might be more comfortable than other speakers, but I want to.
It's also a native trait. So yeah, that's one of the similarities that Indigenous people have with Quakers. I was part of a Quaker congregation for a number of years, and of course I've been teaching at a Quaker school for a while. So no, your silence is comfortable to me.
Let's see if we get, so far we're not getting any audio feedback, thank goodness. Last night we watched the movie Gather. But there is, I think, among many people in our culture, some confusion around cultural appropriation. And I guess I just wanted to invite any remarks you might have about cultural appreciation, and to put some context to this. I used to work in a white-led I used to be the white leader of a white-led organization, an environmental organization. And one of the things we came up, we were told by some of our consultants, was culture will eat strategy for lunch. So for example, we would make strategies for how to persuade our fellow white people or anybody to do good things like take care of the earth or restore habitat or restore the salmon, etc., plant trees. And the culture, call it whatever you aspect it is, you know, the logging culture that was highlighted in the 90s during the forest wars, or the cultures you've been talking about from our Greco-Roman backgrounds, binary thinking. And so I guess I just wanted to invite your comments on not just cultural appropriation, because I think we approach often a white person will approach learning, finding it hard to find out where to learn from indigenous worldviews and how to integrate that. You know, for me, it's more of a solitary thing than a community thing, the study of it. And there's this sort of, we don't want to do it wrong. And associated with all this is sort of a guilt that can immobilize one from taking positive action. And I think guilt can be useful at times for reflection, but it can also be toxic and lead to toxic shame. So thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. So I'll go ahead and respond to that. Couple things. One is that, yeah, so what I'm talking about is basically value appropriation. So I want people to take on an indigenous worldview, so they will take on indigenous values. And we don't have a patent on things like respect and things like inclusivity. And we don't even have a patent on the earth. Native Americans don't. So we all have the sort of an equal footing there. Now, when you talk about using particular ceremonies or things that Native people have developed over the years, those have to be, you have to ask for permission. You have to be given permission. Just like I do, or any other Native person does. We don't just do things. We have to be sort of trained and mentored and then given permission to use those things. And so we're talking about Native American objects and ways of doing things. That's a whole different story. Nobody's invited to do those things without permission. But if you want to please Native people, the first thing you can do is work to cure the earth, to heal the earth, because that's the most important thing. The earth is what sustains us all, and it's what will sustain our future generations. The Western worldview won't sustain our future generations. It's headed off a cliff. And so, you know, my wife and I will spend the rest of our lives trying to help people move from a Western worldview, convert them really to a more indigenous worldview that's full of indigenous values, which is one of the reasons I wrote the book Becoming Rooted, because I wanted to sort of like give people just small pieces that they could do on a daily basis to reconnect with the earth. And I believe that that will begin to change their worldviews. And I already know that it has been changing people's worldviews and been able to get a lot of good feedback. And so, and there's some other, you know, great books out there. Braiding Sweetgrass is another book that a lot of people have read and should read. And there's other books, but yeah, being with Native people, who are the people of your land? Are you attending their events? Are you listening to what they have to say? Are you looking on their websites to see what kind of things they're fighting for? 99% of the time, they're fighting for some kind of rights for the earth. Yeah, and so to hang with Native people, you sort of have to go out of the way because they call us the invisible minority, right? But we're very much here and living in a world sometimes all to our own because of the consequences of the past, of course. But you'll find that there are lots of times cultural pages and announcements on these websites and papers that the tribes put out that you can be of help to, and you can hang out with, and you know, even you can show up and say, hey, you're having a powwow, could my group come help you clean up? You know, I mean, so there's ways to be around Native people without, you know, sort of showing up and having an expectation. So I would say that, but it's these values, these Harmony Way values that are indigenous to the earth, of looking at everything in creation as our relative, looking at how we treat everybody and everything. So if I'm looking at balancing the whole community of creation, yeah, I might be trying to save a watershed in one place, but maybe I'm also trying to stop human trafficking. That also is bringing harmony in the world. Maybe I'm also, you know, trying to pass legislation that will make things more equal for everybody. That's also trying to bring harmony in the world. And so when you have these values, you can turn in any direction and exercise them. But, you know, it's crowded. The West also teaches us all these values that we're supposed to have. And most of them are contrary to our own survival, contrary to indigeneity, contrary to a Harmony way of living, and frankly, very contrary to the teachings of Jesus. And so we just sort of need to go through those and begin to adapt.
Hello, Randy. My name is Alonso Oliveros, and thank you for your presentation. You know, lot to decipher and take in. Thank you, thank you. One of my questions was regarding the concept of like in your presentation, it made it sound like, you know, like elitism or like the native societies of the New World were without class, we're classless, or that there is you know, that the concepts of mandate or slavery or domination were just solely from old world or from the European perspective. I guess my question is, you know, in terms of like the current repression that we see in Native communities and Native societies is also has some historical background. Like, so for example, in Central and Southern or South America, you know, especially during the conquest, the colonization. It's not so much that the European colonizers came, but I believe that they came at the right conditions, where there was a lot of warring factions between societies. So, like for example, the Aztecs. If the Aztecs hadn't been so repressive and oppressive against the neighbors like the Toltecs and the Olmecs and the Chichimecas, they wouldn't have sided with Cortez and the colonizers and say, oh, you know, we're gonna place our bet on them because we've been repressed for so long. You know, they saw them as the lesser of two evils. Similar to you know, the native participation siding with the British versus the French. You know, there was different warring tribes. So I guess, you know, the whole concept of, you know, that it was not a classless, or that it was a classless society, or there wasn't greed going around, even resonates today with the concept of blood quantum, right? Big controversy of even tribes trying to desegregate or what's the concept? Take away citizenship, tribal enrollment. So I guess if you could explain to that in terms of what's going on right now, that to this day we still have some native communities that don't get along, you know, that have been historical enemies.
Yeah. Oh, I'm happy to address that. So, yeah, I mean, I didn't say that native societies were perfect. I've been teaching Native American studies for 20 something years, but I really won't address things south of what we call Mexico and farther south. That's not my expertise. North America is. And so I'll say that there were a number of societies that were based on hierarchies and chieftains and sort of almost gods. There was the Natchez in Louisiana. There was the, I've forgotten the name of the group down in Florida. And a lot of those tribes probably came from the South there. I can only tell you that the stories I know from my tribe, which, and also other tribes in North America, who basically were not hierarchical, they're egalitarian. That was by and large the population, but there was a lot of diversity. There's no sort of one pattern. But what you had in all of these tribes was what we call a harmony way ethic. They knew how they were supposed to live. They knew how they were supposed to act. They knew how they were supposed to take care of the earth and others. When you talk about war among indigenous peoples, war was something very different. By and large, war was not fought to usually There are a couple of exceptions, just like there are for everything. But war was not fought to completely take over someone's land or make them become a part of your religion or your philosophy. In fact, there were no religious wars in this country until after 1492. And then in terms of siding, yeah, that siding with the British and French and all of that, yeah. So they took factions that were already there and exploited those for their own ability, not for the native people's ability, but for their own French and English. So yeah, the point is, though, is that what I'm talking about with these values is practically universal among indigenous peoples. And even if they didn't keep it, they knew that they were the right things to do. Yeah, you can't really use a couple of red herrings like the Aztecs and the Natchez and sort of paint that as all of Native America. That's just not the case. In the case, just like the case isn't that everybody wasn't practicing what we would call the Harmony Way ethic.
I think Sarita had a
And
question.
in terms of tribal, one more thing, in terms of the tribal things, yeah, we're very much, and this is why it's so important right now to reclaim these traditional values. We are very much colonized. Been under hundreds of years of colonization. The Bureau of Indian Affairs has come in and taught the tribes how to take on these Western values and treat each other. And so there's all this fighting that goes on and everything else. We are losing our indigeneity. And that's why, we may be at a crucial moment right now. There are those traditional communities in all of those tribes, though, that have kept their own indigeneity and their own Harmony Way ethic. So.
Sarita?
Mute. There. Can you hear me? Thank you. Thank you so very much. I totally appreciated this presentation. It went straight to my heart and through that to my mind. I did not notice, and here's something that I often don't see very much, is the role of mind expanding materials in native cultures like mescaline, peyote. And I would be very interested in knowing your take on their utilization, and if you see any appropriate utilization that would help us to heal our deformed outlook.
Yeah, thank you. Well, all plants are considered medicine, and they have a use, either human or non-human use. And so various tribal cultures have used various plants. Again, there's no such thing as like, all Native Americans did this, there is these commonalities of values. But in terms of practices and things like this, some use peyote even before the Native American Church was use of peyote among indigenous peoples. I know in South America, they use ayahuasca. Mushrooms have been used in different tribal groups. Black holly drink was another one. So there's probably a whole, there's probably experts in this field that could address all of that. All I know is that the sort of tertiary use and if a plant helps to heal you, then it's a healing plant, it's a medicine. But people are also trained in these things over the years. You can't just kind of go do stuff. You have to be trained and mentored in order to use them right, just like any other ceremony. And so my feeling is, if it's a healing plant, then it's meant to heal you. I know there's lots of things like, for example, right now with psilocybin mushrooms that are being used for trauma. That's especially been helpful in hospice situations, helping people come to the end of their lives and other things like this. So there's lots of discovery going on.
I appreciate everything we've heard today, and I especially am interested in the practice of being in nature and listening and learning directly from nature. Particularly, it seems to me like we need to do this without thinking in words somehow. This is something that I've been practicing in Quaker meeting for, I don't know, 40 years and or more. And getting into that place where it's beneath all the symbolic constructions of language and just having direct experience of earth. And I've been reading the Becoming Rooted book, and I noticed that this is a recurring theme: is listen to the birds, listen to the plants, listen to the waters, listen. And so I wonder if you could address and share a little bit with us how to just be in nature and learn from nature as we are instructed both by the indigenous worldview and also by the book of Job. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think more than the book of Job, even, I think Jesus is an interesting person when it comes to his relationship with nature. He talked all about flowers and birds and trees and grains and soils. And there was a lot of modern inventions at the time. You had chariots and crossbows and aqueducts and all of those kinds of things, but that's not what he spent time talking about. And I noticed he also would go out in nature a lot. That passage in Luke where he goes out into the wilderness for 40 days. We always focus on like the 3 temptations, but like, what about the rest of those 40 days? What was he doing? And then the next chapter says he came, he appeared in power and in the spirit after being out in nature. And another place, the book of Mark, just about every time a big crowd gathers, he takes off and goes and gets alone somewhere. So we can even look to Jesus to understand that there's a relationship with nature that's maybe missing in our modern day. In Japan, they have, I think I mentioned this, they have forest bathing, as even doctors prescribe it now, to go out in the woods. And there's something biologically that happens. There's a hormone released in the trees and that is absorbed in our bodies and creates, good healing stuff in us just by being out in the woods. But let me talk about, I taught this class for years called Theology and Ethic of the Land. And one of the exercises is we'd go out to a campground and camp for a few days. And I'd say, now I want you to go out in nature, and I just want you to be there for 2 hours. And so everybody described the same thing when they come back. They're like, and I was always afraid, well, they won't come back and say anything. And it's just tell me what you thought about and saw in nature. And they all come back and say, well, the first 20, 30 minutes was all me thinking this and that. And then all of a sudden I start noticing stuff around me, and I notice a bird, or I notice a bug, or I notice a plant. And then I start thinking about this. And then, we are made to be natural creatures in nature, but we've created this facade that keeps us from creation, keeps us from nature. And then when we're surrounded by that constantly, we think about who wrote these books, and who built these shelves, and who built these buildings, and and sort of how great accomplishments human beings can make, and they can't. But when we're out in creation, it's just like spirit. And my suggestion is just be out there long enough for spirit to take hold.
This is Jill. I am so thankful that you agreed to be here, and I'm glad that the Zoom venue worked really well for you. I'm praying for your healing that from your illness. Thank you for making this time in spite of not having felt well recently. I learned something new every time I attend a ministry that you present. And today, the part that rises to the top is the idea that of chaos versus order, and standing that concept on its head. And those slides went past really fast. And so that's something that's really important to think about. What is the definition of stability? I just really appreciate your introducing that concept, and maybe you'd be willing to speak a little bit more about the chaos, order, and how to find stability individually and as a group. Thank you.
Thanks, Jill. Yeah, that's something I just started thinking about in the last couple of years. And I'm still thinking about it. I'm kind of slow on the uptake, so I kind of let things ruminate in my head for a long time and start talking about them and learning more. But but it just hit me when I started thinking about what's going on in the earth, and we think that's chaos, right? We think the flooding and the fires and and actually it has to do with us not maintaining sort of what we would call, I guess, the laws of nature to work against. And so as I look at our indigenous peoples, like at my wife's people, they were teepee people. They moved with the buffalo. My people, we utilize the flooding every year to fertilize our gardens. And we built in, our villages and most of our crops down on the floodplains, so that each spring they would silt again, and we wouldn't have to fertilize. And I look at all these different ways of indigenous people do things, and it's different than the West. It's different than building a house on the edge of a cliff in Malibu so that when it floods, it's going to fall over, and we do the same thing structurally. We, in native, most native, not all, but in many native tribal understandings of leadership and those kinds of things, it was sort of a kind of a flexible thing. It was like a Cree friend said to mine one time, we just said, like, well, somebody wants to be chief, we'll let you be chief for a while and see how you do, it's not an absolute hierarchy. It's not a fixed structure that can't be changed without, going through all these rules and everything else. So if we think about entropy, and nature is adapting, always adapting to survive through entropy. That's what nature does. Why do we not do that? I mean, we care about stable markets. We care about, stable structures, those kinds of things. And we've built all of those so that they'll break when change comes. And that's how the world is in such crisis. It's trying to hold on to things like homeostasis. Well, because that feels comfortable, right? It's like, well, everybody has a job if we keep things the same, and I don't lose my position, I don't lose money, I don't lose, I mean, and it sounds almost fanciful, right? But that's the wrong way to build a society to last. We have to build according to nature and according to the principles that the creator has sort of given us to observe. And so it's just a matter of looking at the difference between the West and indigenous societies and going, no, we build things differently. We're not working with nature. We're not adapting.
Thank you. Thank you so much for this rich and deep presentation and sharing of your experience and wisdom, Dr. Woodley. One of the things that was mentioned as we went through was restitution and reparations. And I know that there are a number of places to go to find out about possibilities for offering or being part of participating in restitution and reparations. But I'm interested in whether there are specific thoughts you have about that.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I actually do a whole, teaching on what that means on reconciliation. And so basically I'll give that to you in the next minute and a half. I think there's no formula, first of all, for this. We're human beings. We all have different situations. The sort of the Western way is to go, oh, look, I got the parts, I got 1, 2, and 3 down. Now I need to go do this. Now where do I send my money? I don't think that's what's intended. I think we talk about reconciliation, we need guidance. And so the first thing we need to do is begin to educate ourselves, and to educate ourselves with competent guides who can sort of help us figure out like what's happened, where people want to go with it, who do they want to meet with to do it, those kinds of things. And the second thing I think is what I call lamentation or public confession, which is basically to speak truth to power, to come out and say the wrong was wrong and what needs to be done right. And the sort of third step I have is to make restitution, make reparations, and that can take, hundreds of forms, who knows, depending on the situation, what that looks like. And then finally, the last step for me is to memorialize those things, to make sure that there's a tangible marker that tells the story of what happened here, so that people in other generations can see that there was a rift and now there's healing, and and that's part of the story now. So, and what I would direct you to, if you guys, this would be an incredible project for you to all watch. There's a film, And that film is called Two Rivers, and it's free. It's online. It's a documentary film about a community that just kind of came together and said, you know, what's going on? Why is there all native names around here, but no natives? And they started learning from the native people, and eventually some relationships were formed, restitution, etc. And now there's a cultural center there that was donated to sort of as a marker, a living marker to what's gone on. But I think it's, I can't tell you the website right now. Maybe somebody can look it up, but it happened in Twisp, Washington. And whatever the county that is, I think it might be, or Twisp. But anyway, when you go to that cultural museum in Twisp, Washington, online, and you'll see there's a page that says the film, I think. And it's a 1 hour film, and it's well worth your time to watch it. If you want to see an actual real demonstration of what this looks like in real life, that would be the thing I would recommend. Not as a formula, but as a model, you know.
Hello, it's Alonso Oliveros again. Just wanted to follow up on what you had mentioned about reconciliation. What are your thoughts and opinions about land acknowledgements? Because I see like, some organizations are starting to adopt land acknowledgements. For me personally, like if somebody were to do that for me, I'd be like, okay, so you're acknowledging that my land was stolen and theft occurred. What are you going to do to make that right? Are you going to give me back the land, the deed to the title of the land? What are you going to? How are you going to follow up with that than just words?
Yeah, exactly. And I honestly, this is something people all over the U.S. and Canada are asking, you know, constantly, because most people now in churches are doing land acknowledgement. But I always say that's just the first step. Where do you go from there? Educate yourself, get connected with the tribal peoples. You know, maybe you have an event and you invite the cultural director from the tribe to and pay them well to come in and tell the story of the land. You know, maybe that starts something, but there's a lot of ways to go with that. But I always tell people, if all you're going to do is just do this and not go any farther, then just put it up on a sign and say, you know, we acknowledge this is the land of the, you know, Santiam Kalapuyan, and it was stolen, and we're not going to do anything about that. So then you don't have to say it anymore. You just put the sign up that says, we're not going to do anything about it. It's kind of tongue in cheek, right? But yeah, no, I think land acknowledgement is a good first step, but it can't be the only step.
Forgive me for stepping in. This is Jill's promotional minute, because Eugene Friends Meeting does not have a land acknowledgement at this time, and we've decided to approach differently. Our first step is to explore reparations and let the land acknowledgement grow from the relationships that are, well, that come from our explorations. So thank you very much for being one of our guides.
Yeah. I don't know that there's any, like I said, there's no formula. Yeah. Doing something is always better than doing nothing, right?
If there's nobody speaking in the meeting hall, I'm on Zoom. And also thank you for your many years of thinking of this, begin on this topic and teaching and writing on this topic. It seems to be a very timely message. And what has been rising in me was witnessing the falling apart of so many systems in our country and thinking to myself, there has to be a better way. This is just, but the fact of the systems falling apart before our very eyes, just disintegrating, was just really eye-opening. And I noticed it's not one system, but many systems that we've counted on. And so obviously that is a message to me, to reconsider all these different ways that we have thought of. And I'm talking about every system that we've thought of, you know, the way that we have it structured, our medical system, our educational system, our political system. We've all just, I've always just been a part of that. And then the virus really made an impact into all those systems. And all of a sudden, we couldn't even send a letter, you know, in the mail. And simple things that we took for granted. And so it's timely. It's a timely message to me. That's a big picture message about, like you said, it's a heads up. It's a red flag. It's many things waving at us saying, hey, reconsider, take another way, take another route. And I do appreciate it. It's not fully thought through in me, but I do appreciate the message because it's more for me to think about, more for me to draw from in my rethinking of how personally I live, you know. And then collaborativeness nature of these systems. Like, for instance, I work in hospice chaplaincy. I go into nursing homes, skilled nursing facilities every day. Not working very well for the ones that need it. No, not working at all. There are many people getting very wealthy based on that system of how it is organized now, to the detriment of those who have nothing and have no power and no way to object. So it's a place, it's a system that God has put me in for me to view, and then for me to have creative ideas of what it means for that system to be put right. I'm just one person, but I really believe it's God designed for me to look at this and not turn away from it, but see it as it is. So thank you.
I'm deeply touched by what you had to say. Thank you so much. Yeah. The one thing that comes to mind when we talk about all the systems, that's, you know, it's true. But one of the things I used to believe was like sort of the bigger audience I had, the more change I could make. And what I realized after a while was that actually the best model I can make will have the most impact in the world. And so we don't need to solve all the problems all the time. Just maybe we can solve one and it becomes a model in your local community or whatever that spreads. This is why Edith and I have Elahe Indigenous Center for Earth Justice and Elahe Farm and Seeds. It's a living model for people to come out, go to our schools, our extended weekend schools, experience the things that we're talking about, experience the earth, and basically live what we're trying to do. So it's like the old saying of sometimes a picture's worth 1,000 words. I think a good model can be worth, be worth that too.
Well, thank you for spending some of the precious time of your life with us today. I'm gonna let Becky close us, or Helen is gonna close us. Okay, this is Helen Park, and she's gonna close our time this morning. Just much gratitude. Thanks again.
Thank you for the invitation.
Indeed. Much gratitude from all of us. Thank you so much, Reverend Dr. Randy Woodley, or Friend Randy.